Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cafecito con ILLCF, celebrating LGBTQ Latine leadership, resilience, and community impact. My name is Elizabeth Liz Villarreal, and I'm a past ILLCF scholarship recipient. I also serve as the chair of the Alumni Association Board, Leadership and Development Committee. It is a privilege to welcome you into this space today. Before we begin, a few quick reminders. Please remain muted unless speaking. Stay present and engaged throughout the conversation. Audience questions will be held until the end. If you require closed captionings, they are available. Make sure to select it. We ask that everyone help maintain a respectful and inclusive space. This cafecito is grounded in lived experience, leadership, and community voice. It is my honor to introduce our moderator, Dr. Milka Ramirez, who is a past ILCEF scholarship recipient and currently serves as the first Latina identified known out queer Puerto Rican president of a higher ed institution in Chicago, the Institute for Clinical Social Work. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Milka Ramirez.
Thank you, Liz. That was a mouthful, and I appreciate that. Um, I want to welcome everyone. And before I do that, I think I would be remiss if I didn't welcome into this space our ancestor, Silvia Rivera. And because this talk is about Latine identities and intersectionality, I think it's important to understand that tomorrow is Pride and that is a celebration of the 1969 Stonewall, what people call riots, and I refer to as a rebellion. And there were many people that were involved in that, but predominantly Black and brown trans folk. And Silvia Rivera was one of them. And so I call Silvia Rivera into this space to be with us, and I hope you'll join us in welcoming our ancestor, who I know is here shining down on us with a great deal of pride. So with that said, I would like to please, open up this space and we'll turn it over to our panel. Actually, I think we turn it over to Manuel. I apologize. Let's turn it over to Manuel first, who has some beautiful words to share with us, and then we'll turn it over to our panel for introductions.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Manuel Hernandez Nunez, and I go by he, they pronouns, and I currently sit in the role of executive director at Alma Chicago. And so this conversation matters because Latina LGBTQ plus leadership is not just theoretical. It is lived every day by people organizing their families, protecting their communities, building institutions, advocating for policy and creating art, caring for one another. And for many of us, leadership did not begin with a title. It began with survival. It began with translating for our families, navigating systems that were not built for us, showing up for chosen family, and learning how to lead from the margin long before they were invited into the room. And so Latina LGBT people live at intersections that are too often discussed separately. Race, language, immigration, gender, sexuality, class, and so on. When those intersections are ignored, our people fall through the cracks. But when they are centered, our communities become stronger, more honest, and more equipped to build lasting change. This panel is important because it reminds us that Latina LGBTQ plus leadership is not one story, one identity, one generation, or one pathway. It is broad, it is regional, it is rural and urban, it is immigrant, first generation, Afro Latina, indigenous, trans, queer, non binary, undocumented, differently abled, working class, faith rooted, and deeply resilient. Latina LGBTQ plus leaders have shaped movements even when history failed to name us. We have been part of the HIV/AIDS advocacy, immigrant justice, labor movements, housing justice, reproductive justice, racial equity work, and the fight for LGBT protections across the country. Our impact is not only in major policy wins or public campaigns, it's also the quieter work. Helping someone access affirming healthcare, supporting young people coming out, accompanying families through crisis, mentoring other leaders, or creating spaces where someone can finally breathe. That, for me, is what leadership is. And often that is the kind that changes lives before it ever changes headlines. For me, this work truly is personal. As a gay, indigenous Puerto Rican man, and as someone who has had to navigate identity, family grief, community, and leadership, I know that our stories are not separate from our work. They are part of the wisdom we bring to it. Too often, people are often told to leave their lived experiences at the door in order to be seen as professional or credible. I reject that. Our lived experiences is not a weakness. It is data, it is strategy, it is memory, it is accountability. And the leaders closest to the harm are often closest to the solution. But they are not always closest to the resources, decision-making tables, or institutional power. That is what we have to change. And so a little bit about Alma. And Alma Chicago was founded in 1989 at a time when Latina LGBTQ plus people were too often invisible in both Latino spaces and LGBTQ plus spaces. Alma created a home for advocacy, visibility, and community. Over the years, Alma has evolved to better reflect the breadth of our communities. That evolution matters because leadership must evolve. Our language, our strategies, and our institutions must be accountable to the people we serve. Today, Alma is the oldest Latina LGBTQ plus organization in the Midwest. Our work continues to focus on expanding power within Latina LGBTQ plus and gender expansive communities through advocacy, leadership development, coalition building, and community-centered programming. At Alma, we believe leadership is not about proximity to power for its own sake. Leadership is about responsibility to our communities. That means cultivating other leaders who are not only impressive on paper, but accountable in practice. It means creating pathways, especially for young people, trans and gender expansive people, immigrants, and those who have been closest to the systems of exclusion. It means understanding that lived experience must be centered, but not exploited, which we often see. We cannot ask people to tell their pain over and over again without also giving them resources, platforms, protections, and decision-making power. One of the most powerful parts of the work is seeing people move from isolation to connections and from connection to leading their own path. We have seen young people who first came to us looking for support later step into advocacy spaces. We have seen families who were scared or unsure begin to access resources, ask questions, and support their LGBTQ plus loved ones. That is the impact of our community-centered leadership. It does not simply produce resumes. It produces confidence, belonging, courage, and responsibility. And so I challenge everyone who is listening today, as we begin today's discussion, I want to challenge us to move beyond celebration alone. Representation matters, but representation without power is not enough. Visibility matters, but visibility without safety is not enough. Inclusion matters, but inclusion without resources, decision-making authority, and accountability is not enough. The question before us is not only how we recognize Latina LGBTQ plus leadership. The deeper question is, how do we invest in it? How do we protect it? And how do we follow it? Today's panel is an impressive panel and gives us an opportunity to really listen deeply, not just for individual stories, but to the lessons those stories carry. I hope we leave this conversation with a clear understanding that Latina LGBTQ plus leadership and individuals is not emerging from nowhere. It has always been here. It has been organizing, caring, resisting, and building. Our responsibility now is to make sure that leadership is not treated as symbolic, temporary, or exceptional. It must be supported as essential to the future of our communities and to the future of justice in this country. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and thank you to the leaders who will share their stories, insight, and vision today. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Milka.
Thank you, Manuel Hernandez, Executive Director of ALMA. Yes, I see all these applause. If we had been in person, people would be standing here and giving you a standing ovation, but we could virtually just clap, right? And Manuel, if I may, Manuel, you know what I took away from your talk? I love this, right? That leadership is not proximity to power. What I walked away with is that leadership is proximity to the struggle. So thank you for that. And thank you for inviting us into that challenge, Manuel, and speaking from the heart. Thank you. So let's begin by getting to know this amazing panel. The challenge is to do this in 90 minutes, this entire panel. But I want you to know that this is the first of many. And so rest assured that this will not be the last time that we have this conversation. This is the beginning, but rooted in so much history, right? So we'll begin with brief introductions of our panel members, that they will introduce themselves. And what I would like you to share is what brings you to this conversation. And also, if you can just share beyond your role, what is your shared journey, right? So what brought you to this conversation? What brought you to this work? And share a little bit about your journey with us. We can either arm wrestle to see which panel member wants to go first, or I can call one of the panel members into going first. So I'll pause for a minute to see how this naturally flows.
I can go first.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for inviting me here to have this conversation. My name is Reina Ortiz. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the program director of Task Force Prevention and Community Services on the west side of Chicago, where we get to center Black and Brown LGBT youth and provide a multitude of real life, grassroots, hands to hands resources to, help our community. So a little of why I got into this work. I am indigenous trans person. I am Boricua and Mexicana, indigenous. I've been identifying as a trans woman for over 30 years. I came out in 1994 when I was 14 years old. My mother says I came out in 1988 when I was 8, but she remembers that. But I came out physically very young. growing up in Chicago and experienced a tremendous amount, a brutal amount of discrimination, physical abuse, just a bunch of stuff. I started engaging in sex work when I was very young. I like to say that my journey is from sex work to social work, now working with young trans people that are engaging in sex work as well, and not just telling them, but also just showing them by just showing up and being present and advocating for the community, and so that's kind of how I got into advocacy work, is my lived experience as a former sex worker who started as a teenager and ended in my 30s. And I really learned such a tremendous amount of wisdom, and I think it's very equal to my journey in nonprofit work. None of them are stronger than the other. My experience as a sex worker taught me tremendous lessons that I get to now share and teach and grow with my community as a whole. So I'm very grateful to have been invited here, and I'm so honored to be with so many powerful people on this panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Reina.
I'm happy to go, Milka. Buenas tardes. My name is Norma Celedon. I currently work for Equality Illinois as their Director of Leadership Development and Capacity Building. I bring to this space an intersection of identities, Mexicana, immigrant, queer, mother, consultant, activist. And so that is important to mention, because as we dive into the conversation today, I ask us all to keep present that these are questions about intersectionality. This is not about either or. This is not about whether we focus on what is most urgent or what topic is most urgent, because it becomes more urgent and more essential to have these conversations when we're talking about intersectionality. I have been doing leadership development for 35 years. I began as a domestic violence, sexual assault counselor at Mujeres Latinas en Acción. I've been an executive director twice, and now I am thrilled to support CEOs with queer identities through our program at Equality Illinois, to make sure that we are defining leadership by ourselves, for ourselves, and that we are defining capacity building and what strength looks like to our organizations. So I'll stop there.
Gracias, Doctora Norma. Let's put some hands together for that new accomplishment as well, right? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Reina. So I'll call the other panel members into this space to also please briefly introduce yourself, your identities, and how this relates to the work that you're doing.
I can go next. Hello, everyone. My name is Liliana Macias, Mexicana, queer. I wear many hats. I'm a cultural worker, an educator, and a scholar. As a cultural worker, I've worked in many museums and cultural centers. I also am I am one of the co-founders of Raíces Chicago Story Coalition, a new nonprofit, and our focus is to build capacity around the preservation of Latina Chicago stories. Because believe it or not, we are not very present in most of the larger cultural institutions, and that's a problem. And so Raíces' work is really focusing on how do we build that capacity, not not for the community, but with our communities, right? Making sure that folks have access to the storytelling tools and that they are empowered to tell their own stories. I am an educator, so I have taught and lectured at wonderful places like Northeastern. So it's cool to see other Northeastern folks here. I'm a graduate of Northeastern, a proud graduate of Northeastern. And I'm also a scholar. I am in my dissertation writing phase of my PhD in history. The title of my dissertation is called The Cartographies of Queer Latinas Chicago. So, looking at the ways in which queer Latinas navigated and crossed multiple borders across the city to create dynamic relationships to make the city what it is. I often say there is no Chicago without queer Latinas, and we have not been on the map, but let me finish this PhD and we will. But also through the work of Raíces, I'm able to activate that work now. So I am working on the preservation of queer Latina stories in partnership with multiple institutions. And what brought me to this work? Well, when I was 12 years old, my parents disclosed to me that I was undocumented, and that changed the trajectory of my life. I don't know why, but I became obsessed with the idea or with the fear that I wouldn't be remembered. And so I had a lot of anguish about this. And I thought often, how do you document the undocumented, right? And so, because of these experiences, I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to preserving not only just my story, but the story to facilitate storytelling for other folks as well, so that nobody's story gets lost or misinterpreted. And so that has been really important to me, and has been central to my journey in this work of preserving the memory of Latinos in Chicago.
Thank you, Liliana. And I'm going to say congratulations ahead of time for your PhD because we're just going to claim that, right? So congratulations. Um, I think we also have Oswaldo and Aces, so we're gonna just open the space for they to also introduce themselves.
Since you said my name first, hi everyone. Osvaldo Alvarez, Executive Director here with the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus Foundation. Extremely excited to be here and share this space with you all. And I don't know, I mean, I feel like, what can I say about me other than, I'm a kid from Logan Square, born and raised. Fullerton and Central Park are my corners, Mozart School, Kelvin Park High School, right? And for me, it's very exciting to be in the space where someone who understands and intersectionality, if you will, has been able to. I am now privileged to be working in a role where my job is to actually identify with all of these different identities, if you will, to bring them together under the umbrella of what the Latino Caucus is, right? So it's very exciting. I feel like one of the things that I will say, and I've always said, is that I think that for a long part of my life, right, I have said, "Oh my God, why am I gay?" Like everything. And I feel like in this job, this is the first job in my life where I have said, "Oh my God, thank God I'm gay," to be able to connect with all of these different spaces, right? And so all that to say that, I feel like as my journey has gone, I have realized the power, if you will, that we have, and how to leverage that power. So with that being said, thank you so much everyone for being here, and thank you, Milka, for helping facilitate this conversation.
Hello, everybody. My name's Aces Lita. I'm a director of public policy at Equality, Illinois. I use him, his pronouns. I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, not from Chicago, but I've been hopping around the country for a number of years, but lucky to have landed in Chicago in the way that I did. Um, I think something that I bring into this conversation is a lot of the me synchronizing with the universe in some way or another. I feel like I'm pseudo-spiritual, harmed by my experience in the Catholic Church, but um, I think I find a lot of the beauty in having connected with folks on this call in one way or another. As a queer Latino living with HIV, I think the biggest message I kind of bring into this is just like the damages and harms of our failed healthcare system. I think growing up in an age where we would go to like a curandera for an injury as our form of insurance, um, to now being older and then having gone through trying to figure out how could I get on HIV prep, and then that was the time that I actually learned of my diagnosis some years back, just like facing the realities of like how detrimental it is. And I think now with Medicaid cuts about to be, in full force starting in the new year, I think that's like a really big conversation that weighs on me. I think a lot of like other folks that are new to our community, thinking of folks that are new arrivals in the city, and what it's going to look like for them trying to navigate healthcare. If folks that are living with HIV are trying to stay connected to care, what that's going to look like with our safety nets under threat. Um, but all in all, I'm really happy to be here, honored to be as welcome and embraced into the Chicago community. I really appreciate all the love that I've received from folks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. Most importantly, thank you for your vulnerability. Um, I say you said something, right? Synchronizing with the university around this intersectionality. That's powerful. That resonates, and I think it will be resonating for me for a very long time. Um, so I think about the privilege that we have as being out and queer in our identities. And I do say it's a privilege because I also understand, respect, honor people that are not able to be out in their identities. And I have as much respect for them as well. And I think that's important to elevate in this conversation. But given that this group, you are in a position of privilege where you can be out. Like Reina, your story of being out at 8, what a powerful, but I'm sure that with that came some costs, right? And in many ways, all of our coming out stories had some cost attached to it, for lack of a better word, right? So as I think about this, and because we have a cross-generational panel here, I'm wondering how any of these generational differences or even similarities impacted the way queerness was understood and accepted in your family spaces. And you can even go beyond the family spaces if you're comfortable doing that, right? But because we're talking about intersectionality and la familia is so important in our culture, I think not that it's not in other cultures, but it is just fundamental in the way we understand ourselves. I'm just wondering if anyone in the panel would be willing to speak to that.
I can get started if that's okay, only because you kind of referenced my mom, like coming out. So I'm sorry. I like to say that my mother not only gave me life into this earth, but she gave me life as I lived. And the reason why I'm on this earth and while I'm continuing to be on this earth is because of my mother. My mother is an indigenous Mexican India, and my father as well. And so my mother recognizing very young that I was very different from my brothers. I had all brothers, and recognizing and also appreciating the feminine energy that I exude from myself that was never just taught to me, it just came from me. And my mother recognizing very young and also understanding our history as Indigenous people on this land, and I will talk about it to the day that I die. My mother knew that there was gender variant humans that had existed pre-colonial. She had the smarts about it, and she knew and recognized when I was young and feminine as a little boy that people like me have existed on these lands for thousands of years, thousands. And with that understanding gave her the courage and the power to be so open about me being a feminine boy, and that eventually I will live as a feminine entity, you know? And so my mother telling me that I was loved and this house was my sanctuary, and say, in this home, you are Reina, we love you. But the moment you step out into these streets, there's nothing that we can do to protect you, you know? And she knew that the community was going to be, mind you, this is the 90s, early 90s, very a feminine boy growing up, and loved my femininity, still love my femininity, but also my mother preparing me that the world was going to be brutal to me and that I needed to protect myself in all types of ways. And coming back home from just being out in the streets, my mother had created our house to be a safe space for me to emotionally let go and release the abuse that I was experiencing. You know, I was born in a little village, grew up in Pilsen, grew up in Cicero, predominantly Latino communities. And I do like to speak about Latinos being my first abusers, was my own community. As a Latina trans woman, Indigenous trans woman, was that the Latinos in my area were very brutal and bigoted and hateful to trans people. And I think that's still a conversation that leads to us today, is like, how do we combat bigotry? How do we combat and address internalized hatred, internalized, you know, brutality to LGBT people in particularly? But, you know, I always want to uplift and speak about my mama, because my mama was the one that really gave me the courage and the confidence to be able to live authentically as a gender variant human, you know, and I just want to make sure that people understand that she's the reason why I'm on this planet. So thank you.
Thank you, Reina. That is so powerful when you talk about the juxtaposition of this Latino hate in your in our community, um, and then the power of love and the power of calling onto our ancestors, as your mother did, realizing that you are not alone and that she was going to provide that safe sanctuary for you, right? Even though there's all of this that you had to deal with externally, still, I'm sure, have to deal with externally, and the work we need to do in our community. So thank you so much for sharing that story. Yeah,
Yeah.
I honor you for being so vulnerable and appreciate it.
Gracias.
Yeah. Anyone else that would like to, from the panel, that would like to either resonate with anything that Reina said, or add to it, or share your own story?
Milka, I'm happy to jump in. So I want to first thank you for starting with that question. I know it's sometimes a stereotype that familia is so important to us. I think that is actually very true. But I want to answer in the context of the question about why we don't have these discussions, you know, with our general Latina community. And oftentimes the things that I hear is, well, it's difficult because we have cultural traditions and religious beliefs, and there's generational differences. But, you know, I want to push back on all of those. I think that we need to be careful not to blame our culture. So, for example, historically, many indigenous cultures throughout the Americas have recognized diverse expressions of gender, of identity, of human relationships. And we have to remember that there has been an attempt to erase this through colonization. So before the colonizers came, we had people who celebrated, we had families that embraced us. And I want to say, from a faith perspective, you know, we are deeply spiritual people. We're generous, we're compassionate, we're family centered and community centered. So belonging is at the core of those values. When you have a religious institute that conflates faith with an obedience to dogma, to the rules of the church, then people always fear not belonging. And so when we reject our own hijos, our own familia, it is because of that fear of not belonging to the general community, or for somebody saying you're not a good parent, you're not a good mother if you raise someone who is confused about who they are. And then finally, from a generational perspective, I also reject that idea, because oftentimes when people come out, it is the abuelas who sometimes are the ones that are there to protect us, to preserve our identities, to work through, they become our strongest advocates and our protectors. And so for me personally, I know that when I came out, if you would have asked me before, I would have said in my mid 30s. But then I realized I had kissed girls since I was 6 and 7. And we forgot that. I compartmentalized that and hid that away from myself, because there was nothing around me that said that it was okay to love somebody of and be attracted to somebody of the same sex. So, homophobia can become a tool to divide Latino communities and weaken our connections to familia. But, this is why these conversations are so important. So thank you for asking or starting with that question.
Gracias, Norma. So what I find powerful about your conversation is that you elevated to the social political factors that have impacted our understanding of queerness in our communities. And Reina talks about internalized hate, and that really is rooted in a colonization of our culture, because that's not who we were as we arrived on this planet. That was imposed upon us, right? So thank you for elevating that conversation and having us think about, well, is this really our cultural identity, or have we been institutionalized and acted upon to believe that, when history does not support that, right? So thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the panel that wants to speak to this?
Yeah, I can jump in. Thank you, Norma and Reina, for your stories. Um, I think I have both a really unique experience is that I have experienced both of these things. I did have to leave home at 18 because it wasn't safe for me. I think particularly my birth father zeroed in on my queerness before even I understood my queerness. I remember him insulting me with the term marimacha and me being like, what does that word mean? And now it's a word that I deeply love and embrace because it has such a long, beautiful history. And it's definitely a term of I think a cultural term that mirrors the politics of the term dyke, right, in English. And so, but when I was younger, I'm like, what does this word mean, right? And so I did have to leave home, but I was very lucky that when I was in high school, I met this husband and wife teachers where I taught that I connected with, and they became my family. And particularly, uh, now I call him dad. That's why I refer to my birth parents as birth parents, because now I have I found my parents, the parents that I was supposed to have. And I remember my father. Who adopt my adopted father, who is Puerto Rican, born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I'm Mexican, right? And so he was not only was he instrumental in building a safe space for me to eventually come out to him, but when I did, it was the most normal conversation in the universe. And it also coincided with Pride coming up, and I was, 18 years old. I didn't know what Pride was. And I remember how important it was for him to take me to Pride. And it was my first experience with Pride as a concept and as the Pride event in the city was through this mentor that was like, have you ever been to a Pride parade? And so, I can't explain the moment in where I was standing there looking at this expansiveness of queerness that was made accessible to me by a chosen family. And my parents are everything so this is why I say I experienced both, right? Having to flee my home because my birth parents knew of my queerness and did not accept it, but then being wholly embraced by these and adopted by these amazing folks who not only affirm my identity, but then share their cultural practices with me. And so I feel like it's a very queer life that I have lived. So yeah, thank you.
Does any other panel member want to respond to that before we move on?
I can add in. This makes me think a lot of a wise scholar once told us, Solange Knowles shared with us, do nothing without intention. Um, and I think a lot about like when I came out, I waited to come out, but I feel like there were always signs there that I was, a little bit different. Um, and actually just recently with Father's Day having just passed, it's been 15 years since I've talked to my dad. When I came out to him, it didn't go too well. And I think a lot about how like we frame the idea of like coming out. We do that multiple times in our lifetime. Um, but I feel like looking back, that also provided the opportunity for like my community to come out stronger for me. Um, I feel like that was a moment that I felt really vulnerable, felt really lost, but I saw figures, mentors, friends that I had just met at school that, went 10 toes down for me. Like, if your dad isn't going to be there, I will. At the time, like he was supposed to be my ride back to LA from the Central Coast. And then, well, obviously that was a flop, but I had a friend of mine that said, I'll come and scoop you up in the morning. Like, don't worry about it. Do you have a place to stay tonight? It's just the community care really showed up. And I feel like now I've seen like echoes of that for other folks. And I always try to be mindful about paying that sort of energy and respect forward for others. So if it's like folks trying to navigate the economy, right, in this day and age with AI and trying to figure out like, hey, I'm trying to look for a job, like I'll try and be there and support in the way that I can. Um, or if sharing my story helps, I'll do that. Um, right, like finding ways to come out here and there, if it helps support other folks.
Thank you very much. Um, so, if I can just reflect a little bit, I think about the importance of understanding that everyone's journey is different. And I think it goes back to Norma's point. It's in society, we tend to want to bottle things up and categorize them because then we feel like we can understand them. And the reality is that the best way to understand the journey is to understand the person and be in conversation with the person and understand that each journey is different, right? So I wanted to just sort of lift that up. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't like echo what Manuel said, right? That we're not just human, we're divine humans. And so really embracing that, right? That we are divine humans on this earth, and embracing that in one another and seeing that reflected in one another. So the more we know someone, the more difficult it is to otherize them. And I think that's what's important in this conversation, right? And I'm hoping that that's what people are taking away with from that. Are we really that different? Or is it just that we're not in conversations with one another because we do have many paths. And yes, they're different, but there's so many paths that are alike, right? But you've all touched in on this intersectionality, and that's what this sort of conversation is about, right? And so I think about being Black queer, Black Latin queer, Black, Indigenous queer, trans queer, all of these identities that we've all talked about here. So how can this be lifted up? How can we be in spaces where that is also front and center? And what has your experiences been in lifting up these multiple identities that you carry with you, um, in your workplace, with your friends, with your families of choice, right? How do we continue to elevate that, you think, as a community? And Oswaldo, you kind of talked about this, right? You said, I'm so happy to be gay. Like I'm at a place where I can like navigate my gayness in a way that gives me the opportunity to bring this to light. So, Oswaldo, would you mind leading that conversation?
Sure. I mean, for me, I think that, and I will say this in that, and it goes into the conversation of intersectionality, right? And that, for a long part, we have all of these different pieces of who we are, right? And I do feel like there was a point in my life, for example, that I did question, am I being fake? Or am I hiding? Am I what have you, right? And I feel like it wasn't until later in life where I started realizing that all of these pieces of my identity, if you will, they're all authentic in themselves, if that makes sense. And they're all authentic collectively also. And for me, that was something that needed to be learned, if that makes sense, right? Because I didn't realize this was my superpower, that I could be a chameleon and I can really transform and I can really, but not only transform, I can connect with people. And that's a gift, right? That's a gift that only when you understand that all of you is authentic, is that you can really then create change, if that makes sense. Because now, I think that you strip people from those boxes that you were talking about. I mean, in my work with here at the Latino Caucus Foundation, honestly, I feel like I do this every day, right? Where, I mean, I can lift up my Logan Square, Central Park, and Fullerton, right? I can lift up the road trips to Mexico. I can lift up, you know what I mean? Whatever it is that I want to lift up, and I connect with someone immediately with humans, and immediately, I mean, we're talking about God knows what, right? And the next thing you know, let's talk about policy, right, or what have you. And so, with all of that being said, that is that is my experience, right? A personal journey of mine, to realize, if you will, that all of me is authentic, right? And because I'm choosing one over the other, it doesn't mean it's being fake. It just means that's the superpower that I know how to do.
Thank you. I love that. The superpower, right? We're going to have to get you like a cape
That's right.
so that
No.
people, right, you can walk around with this superpower everywhere. Although I don't think you need the cape for that. Will anyone else want to sort of respond, or anything that Oswaldo said that resonates with you that you would like to amplify?
I want to just add to that, Milka, that I think any person of color, especially Latinx folks, can absolutely resonate with that whole idea of intersectionality, because I think that even beyond our sexual orientation or our gender, we have been navigating cultures and we have become a sort of bridge. And so, in being able to navigate two cultures, that is intersectionality. And I think this agreed with Osvaldo that this gives us a superpower. We are able to be interpreters not only of language, but interpreters of culture, interpreters of orientation, interpreters of gender. And I think that puts us in a very unique position, especially when it comes to changing systems or changing the ways that we interact with each other. I agree. Intersectionality is the magic conversation to be had here, because again, we live in this myth that we are siloed, that we're not either an immigrant or queer. We are both. And so when it comes to equity, this is why it's much more dangerous for us. You know, I could see in another time where Oswaldo would have to keep his sexuality very close to his heart if he was going to do legislative work or impact. I am so happy that we are in this time when he again elevates that and uses it as a superpower. So intersectionality for me gives me the ability to look at things through different lenses, to have different perspectives about things, and to understand why some of us may be reluctant or fearful to embrace our brothers and sisters who are queer if you yourself don't identify in that way.
Thank you, Norma. Will anyone else, does anyone in the panel want to speak to this question before we shift gears a little bit to sort of policy and advocacy?
Yeah, I just want to add to that what Norma was saying, right, about being in having these identities is so important because it really does give us the power to like shift even just the way things function, to expand the way in which folks think about it. And I'm glad that it was Norma who said this because it's kind of tied into her. But recently, in the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of working on the Pilsen Latina Legacies Monument that is coming out of Pilsen through the Department of Cultural Affairs. And when I was brought into the project, there was going to be a very specific focus on a group of women. And just by me being in this space and being a historian, I was like, you know, all of these wonderful cis heterosexual women are wonderful, but I also know that there were so many queer women who built all of these the cultural capital that now Pilsen gets to have, right? And so I pushed back a little bit and I said, hey, here is a list of 5 women, one of which was Norma, that made Pilsen what Pilsen is. And so they too need to be part of the conversation. And I'm really glad that I was able to be in that space, right? And to have these intersecting identities that allowed me to make that very important intervention. And, you know, out of that is going to be a monument built. And now, because of that moment of expanding people's understanding of the histories of Pilsen, queer Latinas will be represented. Had I not been in that space and had I not made that intervention, they would have not been part of that. And so I think it's so important because you're right, Osvaldo, it is a superpower. The Pilsen Latina Legacies Project is a wonderful project, but now it's even way better, right? Because now it really is expansive and a reflection of who Pilsen is, which is a very queer community, even if it's not understood in that way.
Thank you for that. Asa, I don't know if you probably wouldn't know this because you're not originally from Chicago, but there used to be a store called We Are Everywhere. I don't know if any of you remember this store. And so there would be, all types of queer merchandise that you can buy. We are everywhere. To sort of amplify what you are just stating, we are everywhere, but we need to be elevated, right? And come out of those shadows. But we are everywhere, and we have been everywhere. And it takes for us to be everywhere in order for all of our identities to continue to be amplified, honored, respected, affirmed, and acknowledged, right? And you're already alluding to this, so let's just talk a little bit about advocacy, policy, how we use our intersectionality, our lived experiences to then show up in these places for policy and advocacy, which reminds me of the feminist model, right? The personal is political. So I'm just wondering, as you, because all of you are doing some type of advocacy, or policy work, right? So what would you elevate as the most pressing policy or civil rights battle or challenge um, that we're navigating at this time?
I can start off. One, I feel like that's such a hard question. Like what needs to get done? And I'm like, with so much getting dismantled, it's like, what aren't we supposed to be doing right now? Um, but I love that you're bringing in like feminist thought, black feminist thought into this conversation. I was thinking just like the comments around intersectionality, and I think in my sort of early adulthood, some of like my biggest frustrations was trying to understand why the Latino community at some point starts to feel really fragmented. Like this idea that, all of us are united and are leftist and are progressive, when in reality, it's like we have such a broad spectrum of thought, experiences. We come from so many different parts of the world. Um, some that were generations in the US or what we define the US to be. Um, it's like it's such a rich experience that I feel like it starts to create like a smaller experiment of what solidarity could look like. Um, and to add to like the Black feminist thought, it makes me think a lot about Audre Lorde and how she would challenge us to say we should be convening based on difference, not just, similarities and folks that, can identify with me. Um, I do a lot of 101, how to talk to your legislator about advocacy and, different legislative initiatives. Um, and one of the things that we always encourage folks to think about is like, what's your why? What's calling you into the conversation? What's, moving you to be really passionate about it? And there was one mom that really struck me once. She's like from the suburbs, like completely hardcore, like Midwestern. And we were talking about a very difficult subject around like harm reduction, providing medically supervised forms of consumption for folks so we could reverse overdose on the spot without, all these additional risk factors involved. Um, and I asked her, like, what's your why? This would be something that you can help spark a conversation with a member. And her whole thing was so simple and it was so powerful to me. She's like, because I care. That's it. I just care. Um, and in a room where there were like a lot of folks that were united together because they were someone that, experienced overdose themselves, or they were a mother that lost someone to overdose. Like you're thinking there's something that's bringing you here that connected you to this issue. But in reality, it was just like, no, I just care. Like, I don't have to have experienced a deep loss in the way that other folks in this room did, but I just want to see a better future. I don't think it's okay that we're experiencing this harm. Like, them experiencing this also affects me. And I wouldn't want to see it any other way than to have me be a part of this movement with you all. Um, so I feel like that's a lot of like what I think about when we're engaging folks in advocacy. And then I did mention earlier, I feel like the biggest piece that's weighing on me is like the healthcare infrastructure. Of course, there's like many different areas we can dive into. I feel like Latinos have this gift of like we can tap into anything, really.
Yeah.
It's just like when there's a will, we're gonna do it.
If I may jump in really fast, when I came into the organization, right into the foundation, the caucus already had its five pillar areas, right? And the five pillar areas were like immigration, education, economic development, what have you, right? And I remember that very early on, I asked a question about, oh, what about queer issues and what have you? And I remember that one of the members told me, oh, we have that under the health, right? And then I looked at this member and I was like, so we are a health issue? I mean, and I feel like that somehow made everyone kind of have to take a step back and realize that when and this is a question that I struggle with, that I feel like and even in the space in which I'm in, I struggle to have people understand, if you will, that yes, we are fixated as a public policy field to think about it in terms of issues, right? Immigration, education, what have you, and stuff like that, right? And not too much into populations, right? With the understanding that as a population, we fit in all of these different issues. Meaning that, as we're thinking about different issues, how can we think about then if we can understand that, then how can we then insert a queer agenda, if you will, across all of the issues, right? And I think that that is something that has been. I feel like I know that many people. I mean, I don't really know like what happens in the background of the foundation, right? But I will say that for me, to me, it felt like one of the biggest successes was to actually move the foundation and the caucus away from the issues and more into core values. So that way we're no longer in this one specific lane or what have you, right? And then from there, now we can work together and putting all of these different kind of pieces into across all of the work that we do. So it's just been very exciting. I just got to say that to be able to do that and then that's what I'm saying, and then the third one is like spaces. I would say, from issues to populations to the spaces, because being Latino queer in the city is very different from being Latino queer in the suburbs, right? I mean, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to say. That I think that now I am able to we have been able to structure everything that we do here at the foundation in a way that now it really does think about all of these different pieces of who we are. So anyway, I just wanted to build on that because that's always a hard one, right? Because I think that we're so trained to think of it in issues, not in populations.
Thank you very much. And we think, okay, big issue, marriage equality. Yes. But there are other things that also are impacting us, impacting our communities, impacting our families that are equally important. Oswaldo, I love that you are integrating values, because if you lead from values, that really, like, that is your true north, right? And I love this talk about dealing with differences, because we find that we can find that very difficult to navigate. We don't want to talk about differences. We automatically want to talk about how are we the same. But it's difficult to get there. We don't talk about how we're different, because then we can't see each other's humanity, because I am uniquely different, right? And the story about this person that comes to the work and says, it's because I care. It's because I see my humanity tied into other people's humanity. And so as Latine, Latinx, Latino, Latina, queer, trans folk, I think that's what we're asking other people to see. See me tied into your humanity, because I see you tied into my humanity, right? And then we can't ignore, though, some other big issues, such as the fact that suicide rate is extremely high among some of these populations, right? As you stated, like, trans folk, suicide rate is really, really high, really, really high. So, Reina, I'm wondering if, not to sort of amplify a stereotype, because that can also be a stereotype. But it is a reality, and I'm just wondering, what risks do you think young folk deal with today, and how has the task force prevention and community service help address these challenges? And more importantly, how can we come along with you, right? How can we allyship with you? How could that be a core value for us?
Yeah, thank you. So the conversation that kind of like a rebuttal that I like to talk about when we talk about suicide rate within the trans community, and how it's kind of tied to mental health and all those things. I like for people to understand statistical data, which is white males are number one when it comes to suicide rates, but no one talks about like the correlation between mental health trauma and like white men, and how they deal with suicide, and how it impacts their communities, and right away when it comes to like suicide, they want to tie in trans people, and I think those rates are jarring, because there's reasons behind that, for white men to be the number one in suicide rates, when this whole society has been built around white people. And when we talk about suicide rate within the trans community, when we talk about, statistically, the trauma is associated with being trans and in the exile of this society. It's like two different like spectrums. Our rates are because this society has been built not for us like white men, but built against us as a community, and the impacts of like family exile when we talk about. So for me, when I'm like working with my youth. I've been at my task force for this summer would be 12 years, and people always tell me like, oh my God, is it homelessness? Is it HIV? What are the things that are impacting the community most? And I like to say family exile, to be 13, 14 years old, coming out as queer or as trans and the whole family throwing you out into the streets is so traumatic. And for someone that has gone through a lot, but haven't gone through family exile, thank goodness, because I don't think I would be sitting here if my family didn't support me and love me and had to deal with all the things that I've dealt with as a child with not the support of my family. So for me, when we talk about the community, when we talk about why do trans people or trans youth in particularly commit suicide or the mental health trauma that is inflicted onto our youth, I think we have to once again have a greater conversation about family support, and family nurturing their children, loving their children, supporting their children, especially their trans children. And if they're not, that impacts youth and that subjects them to a various amounts of systematic things, emotional things, spiritual things, in a way that is so negative. So how do we impact that, or how do we understand it? One, I feel so blessed to be at task force. It's a rough org. We're on Cicero and Madison on the west side of Chicago, and it's a rough space because we're dealing with meeting people where they are intentionally. And I think that's the beauty of the agency, So one, just recently, we got a trans woman, a Mexican trans woman who was a licensed therapist who's now working on site. And it was so extremely hard to find a therapist to work on site in this modern Zoom world. I work in person almost every day. You know what I'm saying? Like the kids are coming in. I can't work through Zoom with kids. I have to be in person and I have to be ready and I have to be just a resource center, So to find a therapist, one, I was looking for a trans woman of color. We found a Mexican trans woman who was a mentor to me when I was a youth, who worked her way up to becoming a social worker, and a clinical licensed therapist, and choosing her and making sure that she wanted to be on site, because we needed it. The kids come in, they are experiencing a tremendous amount of trauma, and I needed a therapist that was going to be there to be present, to pull them into the space and give them space to just kind of release it. I think that's one of the biggest things about task force is that, yes, the work is very rough, but I believe, my staff and particularly myself, we are built for this work. We are there. We are, we have doctors on site. We have lawyers on site. We have a fully stocked food pantry. We have clothing closets, showers. We have all these things that are based around and shaped around our participants, which are mostly Black and brown, LGBT centering trans youth in particularly. We want to be present. We need to be present. And we need to make sure that people that we partner with, people that we bring into the space are prepared to do this work, that understand how it's like a war. Trans people have been on a war on our own lands, on these lands for over 500 years. We have been hunted, we have been killed, we've been oppressed, we've been suppressed, we've been all of those things. And something that I like to talk about until 1978 here in Chicago, it was against the law to be a cross-dresser. It was against the law for 120 years in Chicago to be a cross-dresser. It was removed in 1978. I was born in 1980. You know what I'm saying? And just like Jim Crow and just like things, the ramifications still exist exist, the bigotry still exists, so how as a community do we come together to say, one, we have to address our internalized bigotry within our own community, our Latino community, and making sure that we are centering and understanding the history of Two-Spirit Indigenous people and how they were not just a part of the culture, but an integral part of this culture. We were medicinal, we were spiritual leaders, we were all of those things. And I carry that. So when we started off with Silva Rivera, I'm very grateful that because it's important to me, I carry that with me. And I stay true to the mission of the liberation of gender variant people. I work very vigorously, not just as a service provider, but I am deep down inside a policy queen. I love policy. I love to learn. And when we're talking about this administration in particularly, and all the terrible things that it has done to trans people, data erasure, removing trans people from systems. And now as you have to be gender assigned at birth, they're not even collecting data about trans people and all the terrible things that we're going through. And that's intentional. And once again, just like it was 500 years ago, they're not hunting us down and feeding us to the massives. They are systematically erasing us, systematically minimizing us, and systematically, villainizing us into this society. So, I think it's going to take a collective of us, to really step up and start to not only address our own internal bigotry, but also start supporting the most brutalized, not even marginalized, the most brutalized of our community, and saying that we are not going to stand for this anymore, and we are going to support our gender variant people because we need it the most.
Reina, I wish my chat had like my ability to snap, right? Thank you. And this is what I take away, and I'm going to reflect on this as the panel kind of absorbs if they want to respond to Reina, right? Is we must value healing, value coalition building. These are some notes that I wrote. Value dismantling oppression, value trauma care, and that values trans lives, right?
Beautiful. Thank you.
You wove all of that into, you all want a recipe? Let's put these values up front, right? So thank you, Reina, for that. Does anyone want to either come off mic on the panel and respond to anything that Reina said before we move into the last 15 minutes of our discussion? Because I have a few more questions. I think we're all sort of taking
So
it in. Yes.
I wanted to thank you, Reina. You are just so powerful, and it's always a privilege to be in your company and to witness everything that you are doing at all levels. And having worked on policy issues, absolutely, Reina is a policy queen. So thank you for turning lived experience into changing systems, which brings me to the point that, representation matters. And this is why this particular organization, the Legislative Latino Caucus Foundation, exists, is because representation matters. And so I dropped in the chat some numbers. Nationwide, there are 1,300 openly LGBTQ elected officials, and that's 0.25%. So not even 0.5%, not even 1%. It would take 54,000 to level the playing field. And of that number, 165 are Latina. And just dropping some other numbers, we talk about 68 million Latina people in the US. So if we go by the number that LGBTQ folks are 9.5%, that would make 6.5 million LGBTQ folks, Latina LGBTQ folks. But again, only 165 are openly gay or openly LGBTQ plus, and that's only 0.0025% representation. So just putting things in perspective about why representation matters, why inclusion matters. Again, the people that are making decisions, if they don't align with identities, it's kind of hard for them to be making decisions for that community.
Mm-hmm. Right. So thank you for elevating that, because yes, representation matters. And we often say we've come a long way, but there's so much further that we need to get to, right? And you have been so generous with sharing your personal stories, what brought you to this work, your policy, your advocacy, your journey. We've talked about some of the systemic pressures. I know you experience systemic pressures being in this role as being out LGBTQ leaders, whether it is at a small school or it is holding a political position, right? So I'm wondering, right, when these systemic barriers weigh on you, weigh on us, where do you find your strength? Where do you find your joy? What keeps you motivated to move forward? Because you can easily say, you know what, I think I'm going to put this little cape away, but yet you move on, right? So, what is that? What's your true north here? So I'm wondering if the panel can talk about that as we kind of wrap things up and have maybe one more question around allyship.
I can go first since I had a real deep little segment a little while ago. But I love my life so much. I had to learn to love to be trans. I had to learn to dismantle the way that society perceived me and all these things. And then, my journey with sex work that impacted, 2.5 decades of my life, and seeing society in this rare form that very few people get to experience. As you can tell behind me, I have books all over. This is my workspace. I have books I love to read, and Ace is bringing up Black Queer. Bell Hooks is my favorite author. I love Bell Hooks, and I love what they have done to teach me about so many white imperialistic, white supremacy, capitalism, all those things that she talks about. But so reading is when I have time to read is something that I love to do, But for me, mostly really quickly, I just want to say again, is my family, my whole family. I'm a great aunt. I have a great a great great niece that's here with me, and she's 7 months old, and I get to wake up to her and I get to hear her. She lives in the house with me, and I'm like, there's 4 generations of women in my house, and I'm so grateful to have that power around me, and it gives me so much to live for and so much hope for the future. I'm just so grateful to still be on this earth, so grateful to be around people that invest into me. It's beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, Reina. Self-love, right? Self-love as well as the love of the people around you. Thank you. Anyone else in the panel want to reflect on this question? What sustains you? What brings you joy?
I can jump in. I think I'm very fortunate that for the last couple, for this year actually, I've had the opportunity to really just sit down with some incredible queer folks in this city whose history I am deeply committed to ensuring that we document and that it lives for many, many generations. And I mentioned I'm undocumented, right? And the ICE rates earlier this year were really debilitating for many of us, right? It quite literally made us prisoners in our own homes, right? The fear of leaving. And it's funny because as that was happening, that's when I was defending my prospectus for my PhD. And I remember thinking about, for a moment, quitting my PhD program because it seemed like a luxury when survival was was knocking at the door, right? It was a very real moment for many of us, and it still is, and it has been for many of our lives. But there was something about being able to sit and listen to the oral histories of the folks, of incredible folks like Norma, and to hear about the lives of women like Alicia Amador, Diane Gomez, Yvette Cordona, Mona Noriega, Roberto Castillo, who couldn't be here with us, for example. There was something about sitting and listening to those stories in the moments where I felt like at my lowest moment. And it was something so uplifting to be surrounded by the ferocity of just the monumental like battles that these folks took on, right, to make sure that I could exist as queer Liliana in a city, even in these dire moments. And maybe I'm biased because I'm a historian, and so I'm a sucker for a good story. But I just feel like what has grounded me and what brings me back to my joy is just listening to folks tell their story. And it's just, I want to spend the rest of my life ensuring that these stories are preserved, that they're accessible, that I'm not the only one who listens to them, but that we all collectively do, to ensure that we know that we need to deeply commit to the humanity of the folks are whose stories are instrumental to our present. And so for me, the stories of queer Latinas is what has sustained me and continues to sustain me. And every time that I feel like, oh my God, maybe doing a PhD right now is a luxury and I need to focus on survival, they always pull me back and saying, no, survival is not a luxury. Um, it's something that is owed to us, and the way that I honor their stories is by ensuring that they continue to bring life and hope, and strength into this world. And so that's what brings me joy.
Mm, thank you. Yeah. The stories of trailblazers, the stories of our ancestors, and as you put it really well, survival is not a luxury, right? Thank you. And we need you. We need you to tell those stories, right? So thank you for not giving up. Thank you very much, Doctora Liliana. Anyone else on the panel want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think what really resonates with me is when Reina mentioned like the piece about family rejection. I think now about like how I move in the world as an adult, and I'm a pretty quiet extrovert. I love being in the energy of other people. It's really like contagious and it's invigorating. And I was thinking like, what is it that really fuels me? And I thought it was like policy wins, but those are, it feels like so infrequent. You can't be celebrating once every 3 years. Um, I think for me, it's when we're steering the ship together, right? Like we're in relationship, we're in fellowship. Shoot, I'd even count the situationships. Um, I feel like being in a community space, Dr. Mika, when you mentioned like the validating the humanity in one another, I'm a trained social worker, so I used to work in foster care. And when I would finally connect with a family, like that stuff would bring tears to my eyes. Like I'd start watering because I finally get why, we're looking past case notes and looking at what was documented on you, right? But now I'm really starting to see a full picture. And I think that's really what fuels me is when I finally have an opportunity to really like sit with someone and we can see one another and understand a little bit better about how we're moving forward. I feel like dynamics like that are like what really invigorate me. And I think it goes back to the fear of losing family when I was coming out. And I think that helps restore something that I thought I lost. So now I feel like I carry that really close to my heart as an adult.
Thank you, right? This sense of being in community, being in fellowship, or really being in relationship, right, is what I'm sort of gathering from what you said. And I appreciate you lifting that up, and lifting up your family of choice, right? Thank you very much. Anyone else?
I just want to piggyback on the storytelling train. I think storytelling is magical. Like once you hear a story, you can't unhear it. And I think that that is what is going to save this country, is for us to share those stories unapologetically. And I mean, this is where connection and humanity, I think, is born, is through storytelling. And just, my father is 88, and just last year, I heard a story about him remembering crossing the Rio Grande on his father's shoulder at age 4. And so we had never heard that story. And if we do not ask these questions, they are not going to come. And so to be in conversation with each other, but through the fear of, oh my God, I'm going to ask something inappropriate, or what if I ask something wrong? But if I am passionate about connecting with somebody else with whom I share other identities, then it has to be through storytelling. So storytelling absolutely is my joy. And I just want to take advantage of, Liliana asking for my stories really solidified any doubts that I had about what I was doing, and also solidified my commitment to creating change. And so storytelling is very powerful. And so publicly want to thank Liliana for undertaking this. And it's essential. So not a luxury, it is essential.
Thank you very much, Norma. Oswaldo, did you want to share sort of what sustains you as we close this out?
I feel like a whole bunch of things, right? And I think a lot of it has been said already, from family to values to normal things. I mean, by what I mean by normal things, I like to play video games, right? I like to read books. I like to all of these different things that are still me. I haven't I've been very, very big and not letting go of any of those pieces of me, right? And so
Mm,
yeah, so I think that I mean honestly that is what I mean, and I feel like that sustains me, that makes me feel normal and real and still connected to people.
yeah,
That's what I would say.
great. Yeah, thank you, right? So there's the storytelling, and there's also just, whew, let me just be human and play some video games and, walk around in my pajamas, because that also brings me joy, right? So as we wrap up, I want you to think about something. One is allyship needs to move away, I think, from being performative to being authentic. And I can only leave that to the audience here that wants to enter allyship. We can't tell you what that looks like. We hope that you will examine how you have shown up as an ally and ask yourself, is it performative or is it authentic? The other piece that I leave you with is that I want you to imagine, if we're here 5 years from now, throw in the chat, what would be different, right? I'm not going to leave that for the panel to answer, right? We're not going to put that weight on the panel. All of you that are here as an audience, what do you want to see as being different, as changing? And just throw one word in the chat for that, right? So with that said, I just want to thank the panel for your honesty, for your leadership, for sharing your lived experiences, for showing up authentically, with no apologies. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Dulce, who I just realized has been here. Dulce, powerhouse. This is a cafecito just with Dulce in the future, I hope. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone that's been here. I see friends, I see former colleagues, I see current colleagues, I see people that I see in the community who have shown up to be here with us. And we really, really want to thank you for sharing these 90 minutes. I'll turn it over to Liz to say her final goodbye.
Thank you all. This has been a wonderful, powerful panel discussion, hopefully not the last. Remember, lived experiences, you are the experts. This is knowledge that we need to share with everyone. Thank you for everyone for joining us, and everyone who contributed to this meaningful conversation. We hope that this cafecito strengthened connection, deepened understanding, and affirmed the importance of community-centered leadership. Please stay connected with ILLCF, Alumni Association, for future programming and engagement opportunities. Before we wrap up, please don't forget that the scholarship application deadline for the 2026 ILLCF Soy el Futuro Scholarship is July 3rd. So it's open to undergrad, graduate, master's, PhD students. It's open to anyone. You need to fill out the application. It's eligible to all Latino students. In Illinois, you can receive $5,000 in the scholarship. Invaluable leadership opportunities. Please share with others. And I am a product of this. Milka, Dr. Ramirez says, it really opens the door for people. And now it's open to graduate students, which we know need funding. So thank you again. Wonderful. And so Liliana, I'm looking right at you. Thank you all. Thank you to Osvaldo, who's been an excellent CEO, executive director of ILLCF, who's allowed me to develop and flourish as a leader, and Juan Carlos. Thank you all for being here. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, powerful panel.
Gracias y pa'lante, mi gente.